Who killed Toehead White? Do we even know? The placard at the beginning of this video stated that with any historical account, someone always tries to distort the real story. And that's the way it has been with the PUSSER legend and even with the death of Toehead White. Now, there's lots of theories about who killed Toehead. Some are just totally fictional, but some are steeped in reality. That's what we're going to get into today. Let me start out with saying that, in my opinion, Toehead White was the only person who actually earned his reputation in the PUSSER legend. He was about as mean, evil, and calculating as any person could be. Having said that, you need to be aware that there were several people that had motive to want to get rid of Toehead. For instance, Junior Smith. You also had R.D. Matthews, who was high in a hierarchy of a Southern crime family that wanted to seek revenge for the murder of George Fuqua. And then, of course, there's Buford PUSSER. So we're going to examine all three of these theories, and there's probably more, but we're only going to get to these three and see how they wash out. Now, prior to his own death, Toehead was believed to have killed George Fuqua and Doris Grooms in Oklahoma. One theory goes that Jim Blackwell killed Toehead in retaliation for having murdered Fuqua and Grooms. Now, like most of these theories, there's nothing really to back that. However, there are stories that R.D. Matthews employed Jim Blackwell to do the job for him. Now, there's also the theory that it was Buford PUSSER himself that killed Toehead. The stories have persisted for a long time that when Toehead arrived at the El Rey, he was shot from the roof of the motel. Now, that doesn't make sense in the fact that the trajectory wouldn't be right for a shot from the roof. Now, as you can see in this photo, the El Rey was a very small motel. There was only something like 5 or 6 rooms. Toehead was staying in room number 3. So when he pulled up in front of his room that night, if he was shot from the roof, the angle just doesn't appear to be right. First of all, you would think that Toehead might have seen a shooter on top of the roof before he pulled in. But then you look at this photo where Chief Deputy of Alcorn County, Hobart Bingham, is pointing toward the bullet hole in the windshield of Toehead's car. Now think about this for a moment. Look at the location of that bullet hole. If the shot had come from the roof, it would have most likely have hit Toehead in the chest, not the forehead. So this brings us to the story of Junior Smith and his possible involvement in the death of Toehead White. To give you a little bit of a history, Toehead White and Junior moved from the Delta region of Mississippi all the way across the state over to Corinth, to the state line area. that is when both got a start at the state line working for Jack Hathcock. Now, Junior was like a big brother to Toehead. Junior was older, a little more mature, and was a very calculating person himself. While working for Jack, both Toehead and Junior learned a lot about things that happened at the state line, how they operated, how they made money, and both wanted to emulate that to some degree. Now, the theory with Junior being involved in Toehead's death goes kind of like this. After Buford had been sheriff, and he was in his third term at the time, he understood that Toehead was out of prison. He was afraid of Toehead, afraid of what he might do, both physically and what he could tell authorities if he decided to ever talk. Well, the story is that Rex Armistead had warrants for Toehead's arrest while he was out on parole. Some say that Toehead had tried to go straight. He had opened up White's Entertainment, and it was a business that he ran with his protege, Bobby Anderson. Now, Buford was aware of the warrants that Armistead had, and he was afraid that in order to stay out of prison, Toehead might roll over and report the things that he knew that Buford had been doing while sheriff in McNairy County. Of course, the theory goes that Buford contacted Junior Smith and said, hey, if he rolls over on me, then everything goes downhill. You and I have been in business together, and he's going to be rolling over on you as well. Allegedly, this got Junior to thinking, and maybe it was time to do away with his old friend Toehead. So things got into motion. Be sure and subscribe and hit that bell so that you'll get notifications of new videos when they're released. Now, many believe that the story I'm about to tell you is true, but it's never been confirmed. But it does make sense in a lot of ways. Now, it goes that Buford needed to get rid of Toehead, so he arrested an individual they called Blue Tick. Blue Tick was alleged to have committed murders in the past, and so Buford wanted to use him as a tool to get rid of Toehead because he was afraid that when it came right down to it, Junior Smith could never kill his old friend. So he arrested Blue Tick. With charges hanging over his head, Buford told Blue Tick, hey, if you can do me a favor, these charges can disappear. And so he laid out the plot for Blue Tick to kill Toehead. Now, this tale has it that White and Bobby Anderson were living in a motel in Clarksdale, clear across the state from Corinth. But White was operating his business out of Corinth, White's Entertainment, a jukebox operation. White had made plans for he and Anderson to visit Corinth to take care of business and so that White could visit his friend DeWitt Dawson over in Alabama. This plan called for them to stay at the El Rey Motel. After all, it was owned by his good friend, Junior Smith. When White and Anderson checked in, Smith immediately called Buford and said, hey, they're in town. Now, Bobby went his separate way from Toehead that day. Toehead went over to visit his friend, DeWitt Dawson, over in the edge of Alabama. Before leaving the motel that morning, Toehead ran into Shirley Smith. Now, she and Junior had been separated for about 2 weeks because Junior was having an affair with another woman. Shirley was depressed, and Toehead tried to cheer her up. He even invited her to go over to Alabama with him to visit his friend DeWitt Dawson. They spent the day there, and on the way back, they stopped at Arnold's truck stop, where Shirley made a call. Was this a setup? Now it would be around midnight when Toehead and Shirley would arrive back in Corinth at the El Rey. As they pulled into the lot, Smith would say that Toehead saw him and started to curse him, pulled out a revolver and started firing shots at him. So Junior stepped inside the office, picked up his rifle, and returned fire. He struck Toehead with one of the shots. Then he retrieved his .357 and went toward the car, continuing to fire on Toehead. Meantime, Shirley had exited the car on the passenger side onto the ground and rolled under the car to keep from being hit. Now, all this sounds plausible until you get back to that bullet hole in the windshield. I think any reasonable person would ask, if Junior is in the office, picks up the rifle, and is at a right angle to Toehead, how does he hit him in the forehead through that windshield? Doesn't make any sense to me. Did he possibly retrieve his .357 after only wounding Toehead with the rifle, run up, stand in front of the car, and shoot Toehead through the windshield into the forehead? Would Toehead even have been sitting upright at that point in time? A lot of it just doesn't make sense. But let's take a look at an idea that might. Now imagine for a moment that you're Blue Tick Alexander. Would you position yourself on a roof to make such a shot? I've been told a story where Blue Tick was actually inside Toehead's room. So, knowing that Toehead is on his way, he simply watches for the car to pull in. When it does, parks in front of room number 3. All Blue Tick had to do was open the door and fire the fatal shot. Everything else about this ambush on Toehead was staged. Additional shots were fired to make Junior's story sound plausible, and Toehead's dead. Now I'm told that at this point, Junior's girlfriend that he's been having an affair with drives up in front of the motel. Blue Tick gets in and they drive away. Now everyone believes that Junior is the one that shot his friend Toehead. Now there's other things that you have to think about here. Why would Junior actually go along with such a scheme? Well, first of all, much like Buford had convinced him, he was afraid that it's possible that Toehead would roll over on both he and Buford, and he could go to prison. Secondly, there was the financial incentive. Remember that call that Shirley made from Arnold's truck stop? Did she tell him that Toehead had got a large sum of money while he was over at DeWitt Dawson? After all, DeWitt Dawson was one of the people that Toehead allegedly gave a large sum of money to hold while he was in prison. If you want to learn the real story of Buford Pusser, you need to get my book, Buford Pusser, The Other Story. It is full of facts and information that you don't get anywhere else that I know of. It's the story as told by the people who live their own parts in the real tale. It's full of photographs, documents, lots of interesting things to see, and it pretty well outlines everything from Buford's birth up until the time of his death, and even after that, because the family became embroiled in a lot of lawsuits over his legacy. So, again, Buford Pusser, The Other Story. It's available at both Amazon.com and eBay. When I interviewed Barbara Anderson Mitchell years ago, she told me that Bobby had shared with her that Toehead was indeed bringing a large sum of money back from Alabama. It was in the trunk of the car. Well, as soon as Barbara heard about the shooting, she and Bobby went up there. One of the things they did was look in the trunk of the car, and all they found, post hole diggers and a yellow rug with blood on it, along with an aluminum foil that had been used to wrap a money box that contained all the cash. Now, Bobby also knew that Toehead had a large sum of money in a shoebox in the room, so he immediately went in there. The shoebox, which was supposed to have had $14,000 in it, was missing. They looked in the interior of the car, and assuming that they might find some bags of quarters from the jukeboxes that Toehead had, none were to be found. All that Toehead was said to have had on him was $5 and change. Odd for a man who often carried thousands of dollars on his person. I've had discussions with many people about that night. Now, one has told me that Buford was seen waiting across 45 in a private drive, watching to make sure that everything went down as planned. Now, of course, I take that as so much chatter. But then I had a former Corinth police officer tell me that he was told that he needed to station himself at the intersection of 45 and 72, just a little ways north of the El Rey. While he was sitting there, he said that Buford passed by, that they made eye contact, and that he was very familiar with Buford, so he was not mistaken about Buford's identity. Now, he had never heard the story about Buford waiting across 45 from the old Ray to make sure that the job was done. Now, years later, Buford would tell his close friend, Jack Kaufman, that the only person that he enjoyed killing was Toehead White. Who do you think killed Toehead White? Do you believe it was Jim Blackwell, as his story goes, in revenge for the death of his own friend, George Fuqua? Or do you believe it was Junior Smith, who somehow found the nerve to kill his close and good friend, Toehead? Do you believe it was Buford from the rooftop of the El Rey Motel? Or do you believe that it was Lieutenant Alexander who actually pulled the trigger at the behest of Buford in order to free himself from being charged with some made-up crimes? Now, we may never know. What I do know is that whenever I interviewed Hobart Bingham, the chief deputy at Alcorn County, he said there really wasn't much of an investigation into Toehead's death, that it was just one bad guy killing another bad guy. So they were minus one bad guy. So there you have it. I'd like to hear your comments and hear your thoughts about who that you think killed Toehead. All I can do is look at the evidence that I've been able to find and make my own decision about who I thought it was. And to me, it leads back to one person. But I'd like to see if your thoughts parallel mine. So please let me know in the comments section. I'd appreciate it so much. Until we see you again, just remember, truth has no agenda. Thanks. See you again soon.